A number of attempts over a number of years to make the software more interoperable. So we've done things around user interface, we've done things around data interoperability, you're seeing more shared components, we're doing more on the licensing and install front, and we're doing, when you start looking at Project Twitch, you'll see that these things, you just use whatever tool is most appropriate. It's my belief that we're going to move, that if you want to look at one of the changes that's going on alongside these new platforms, is to try to get tools that are more flexible and that people use more easily. And so just bear with me a second. If you think of the software that we make and others make as tools, it's always struck me as strange, but you have to probe a little bit to understand why people tend to overuse tools in our business. If I go into my workshop, I pick up a chisel or a hammer or a screwdriver, and for the most part I use them for appropriate things. Occasionally use the chisel to open the paint can, but I know better, and I try not to. And I'm relatively fluid with them, that I can move from tool to tool to tool. If you look at software, the learning curve is fairly high, price points are expensive, the fluidity in which people can move from one to the other, the amount of data that moves perfectly is small enough that people tend to, what's the old expression, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail? So people tend to do that with software. And I would like it more because I think at its base, every piece of software, we make a lot of software that allows you to make models of things. At its base, each piece of software has an underlying conceptual model. There was something in the head of the designer who made that piece of software about how it was going to be used and what it was going to represent. And I think for different jobs, different things are appropriate. So like as a matter of fact, I'm doing this design slam tonight, and when I was laying out what I was going to do, I had about 5 or 6 pieces of software I was going to use. I don't think that's a typical workflow because I think it's too painful. And these are 6 pieces of Autodesk software. Imagine if it went across different vendors. And I would like to get to a place where the fluidity, and ease at which people can move between tools is more appropriate for the task rather than being weighted down by how easy that transition is. And when you come back 3 months later, you pick up the tool that best does that job. And so I think you'll see more around this idea of interoperability between the products, more similarity between them, at least when it's appropriate.
Any questions on the phone?
At this time, there are no questions on the phone. Once again, if you do have a question,
They are.
We also have questions. Let's go to Belgium. Last year you said, following up on what you just said, last year you said you had too many individual products really on the website. You were going to consolidate some of them. Has that happened?
Yeah, so we've probably reduced the number of individual products we have by about 1/3. And I'd like to see us further consolidate products. And I do believe that a better way, and I've talked about this before, is making products move together into suites. I think it is a way to give better offerings to our customers. And so we certainly already have a fair number of suites, and a fair amount of our business is done with suites, but I think you'll see an increasing amount of business done that way. And then in the long run, as you think about a web-based model, everything is kind of a suite, and you pay for what you want. But it's a transition along that path.
Hi, Carl. I'm Nancy Johnson from Catalyst. So along the same lines then, with this increasing need for interoperability, and I think Autodesk is one of the few companies that is in a position, say, to where you're now allowing inventor models to be brought into Revit for applications that kind of are across disciplines. Do you foresee a time in the future when you might kind of come full circle where AutoCAD was once the do-it-all 2D tool, or we might have a 3D tool that was just really multi-purpose?
No, I think you'll see each of the tools broadening what they're capable of. So I think you'll see Revit being used for a more diverse array of projects. I think we've already seen Inventor go from what it was capable of doing years ago to what it's capable of doing now. I think we've already gotten to the point where we have products that overlap in terms of their capabilities. For example, if you were modeling a process and power plant, or let's say some piping, we have a handful of products that are all very good at doing that. And I'd rather have more overlap than kind of underlap, meaning that I think there are these models, and depending on what's important to the designer, you might choose to do one thing or another. So for example, if I was modeling a bunch of pipes with the goal of manufacturing it, Inventor's a really good choice. If I'm thinking more about what would happen in terms of it's almost a conceptual layout, maybe our 3D plan product is a better product for that. I don't need to know every screw thread and every bolt. And so I think it's different. And I think the ideal state is when you have overlap, but for the things where it's more appropriate, you can move your model from one application to another application. It retains its intelligence, and you get kind of the best of both worlds. And so, for example, one of the things I've always wanted to do, I want to take my Inventor model and bring it into Mudbox. You know, I want to tweak it a little bit in a way that Inventor just doesn't think about tweaking models in that way. And then I want to move it back and get the full power of parametric modeling. And so I think that's more the model that you're likely to see, is kind of the Venn diagram where there's overlap, but you would have kind of arrows connecting to things that allowing things to move from one product to another. I don't imagine we'll ever have a centralized kind of monolithic app as the core of what we do.
More on interop. Randall Newton, CAD CamNet. For the last 4 or 5 years, Autodesk struck some big deals with some of your competitors in terms of interoperability, PTC with Granite, Bentley, back and forth, that sort of thing. Are you still feeling the same amount of pressure from your constituencies for more interoperability deals, or is maybe that starting to wane? I have the impression that the cry for interoperability out there is starting to wane as people are just getting used to the idea of changing native file formats and making do. Do you have a sense on that?
So I would say it appears like in the user community, for the way people work today, they have less need. They certainly have less outrage about it.
Yeah.
I would say two things about that. So one is, I still believe in the premise that underlied our having an agreement with Bentley and PTC and the same offer I've offered to everybody else. We will exchange file formats with anybody. Because my ultimate belief is that, and that was kind of the qualifier of what I said at the beginning, which is, I think for the way they work today, they're adequately served. I think there's no reason to have this inherent limitation. And so what a lot of us do, and this is not a lot of value add, is we now can, if you look at our mechanical engineering products, I don't know what, we read 20, 30 file formats. Right. So we spend a lot of time, wasted engineering effort reading in a CATIA model. There's not a lot of value. I mean, to the end user there's value, but would they rather have us spend time on more important things? In the same way, Dassault is wasting its resources developing Inventor translators and AutoCAD translators and Revit translators. I just think the whole industry would be better served by saying that the goal was to have users be able to interoperate as seamlessly as possible, and that we focused and we competed on different aspects of our products. Having said that, I do think it kind of reached a crescendo a number of years ago, and I think people have figured out ways through it. I also think most of the CAD companies have invested heavily in translators for the cases where there's not a direct agreement between the companies. I know we certainly have.
Carl, I want to come back to your Venn diagram. So you're talking about overlap. Where are some areas where you see there not being enough overlap yet for the products? So, areas where Autodesk might go in the future.
So right now, I think the disciplines that we're serving are the appropriate ones. I think our move into